In the hush of winter, 1893, deep in a shuttered county records office near the quiet village of Stoughton, Virginia, a low-level municipal clerk named Forgotten Face, never recorded, worked alone by lamplight, cataloging tax ledgers long past relevance. Most of the files were ruined, waterlogged deeds, brittle contracts, whose ink had bled into unreadable smudges. But at the bottom of one mismatched bundle, bound with stiff surgical gauze, the clerk discovered something else. Folded, linen-backed paper, a map official in format, but unsigned. It bore no indication of who drafted it. No departmental crest, no legal notation. But it had age. Its corners were dog-eared, and it gave off the faint smell of iron ink and mildew. The map was not centered on any township or survey lot, but instead on the grounds of a hospital that had been razed decades earlier. Its internal layout was drawn in fine graphite room numbers, labeled clearly except for one. Room 12. The number appeared twice. Once correctly in the hospital's west wing, but again mirrored, faint but unmistakably printed in ink on the eastern side of the blueprint in a portion of the building where no corridor had ever been constructed. No foundation, no room. Connecting them a dashed line, no doors, no stairwell. Just a margin note, hand-lettered and in smaller print than the rest. Version discrepancy unresolved. Do not seal. It was filed among architectural exceptions. Non-permitted plans. No initials. No architect had ever claimed authorship. And no administrative record exists explaining who was meant to walk that drawn, unbuilt path. And yet, if you're still watching, perhaps in some quiet part of your mind, you're already walking it, like the video to keep the map visible. Subscribe if you'd like to follow it to the end. And if you're listening right now, let me know where you are, your country, your time. There's something grounding in that. Knowing we're all out here scattered across versions of a shared, now watching the same story unfold. The ledger from St. Augustine's Infirmary in Albemarle County begins as most such records do, with formality, with solemnity, heavy parchment, iron gall ink, a calligraphy of bureaucracy clerical hands trained never to tremble, even when writing of illness or death. On January 9th, 1874, a new entry was penned. A child, female, white. Her name has been redacted in every surviving copy. But the original, still sealed beneath library glass in a restricted archive, retains it. Illegible only by policy, not by time. No guardian listed, no family, no location of origin. The strangeness began immediately. Under year of birth, the attending nurse wrote 1865. But on the reverse side, beneath the physician's intake notes, the same hand, same pen, same ink, inscribed 1871. No line crossed the discrepancy. No correction was made. Only a marginal note in the same looping script. Unresolvable. Proceed with 1871 as primary index. This decision bore the initials of Dr. L.H. Corwin, then chief of the children's ward. A man known even among strict peers for his precision, bordering on obsession. A physician whose lines never wandered and whose schedules never varied. Corwin's private case notes only fragments now survive included this observation. Subject presents with impossible dualities, not developmental delay. Time indeterminate behavior. Recalls events not yet discussed. Passive observation recommended. She was assigned room 12, the West Wing, room 12 the real one, a former servant's chamber with no window, no stove and only one key held by the ward matron. Per hospital policy, all children under 10 were to be kept in direct line of sight from nurse stations. Yet no one challenged her isolation. No memos flagged the placement. No physician protested. She arrived. The record closed. And so did the door. What followed were weeks of quiet accumulation details too odd to be chance, too subtle to be fabrication. Though now indexed as 3 years old, based on the chosen 1871 date, she spoke fluently. She read. She fasted voluntarily. She refused milk, requesting clove water, a preference unheard of in young children, but occasionally seen in patients recovering from adult gastrointestinal illness. Her temperature readings varied wildly, as much as 6 degrees between evenings, without sign of fever rash or infection. Her weight remained unchanged. When allowed to trace letters, her penmanship matched no known regional standard. Too tight for Spencerian, too ornate for Palma. And then there was time. During a preliminary psychological assessment, she was asked a simple question. What year is it? Her answer was not 1874. It was not, I don't know. She tilted her head, smiled faintly, and said, "That depends." Which version of the year are you asking about? Staff chalked it up to trauma, to imagination. But Dr. Corwin did not. His notes after this point shift, no longer detached, no longer precise. He ceases to write her name. He removes her age. Instead, he marks her chart with a symbol, 2 vertical slashes, a gap between, like a broken gate, like a doorway that cannot close. Or maybe, just maybe, the beginning of a path no one ever finished drawing. That symbol, the broken slashes Dr. Corwin had scrawled in her margins, never appears in any other file from his 22-year tenure. Not once. In April of 1874, a junior administrative assistant attempted to duplicate her chart. The goal was routine, to resolve discrepancies, to establish consistency. But the system refused. Her carbon copy was denied. The hospital's internal index, a handwritten ledger used to assign sequential case numbers, simply skipped the next available line. And in faded iron ink, where the number should have appeared, someone had written, "This record does not repeat." No initials, no attribution. Just those 5 words. What remains then is singular. A linen-bound folder, soft at the edges, with 2 recorded birth years. 1 girl. No case number. Somewhere around 1876, no exact date is known. The page itself was quietly removed from the hospital binding. Not discarded, not torn. Removed. In its place, glued in with careful hands, was a single slip of paper. Blank, except for a short, typed line. Transfer read under new authority. No signature, no date, no destination, and no record that she ever arrived anywhere else. The child in room 12 spoke rarely, but when she did, her voice unnerved, not by volume, not by content, but by cadence, a measured, unnatural rhythm that left listeners feeling slightly off. Most children in care, even those in shock, eventually display some flicker of recognition. Grief, resistance, fear. Something human, but not her. Her silence was not absence. It was choice. Observant. Listening. She did not cry. She did not protest. She did not flinch at syringes, nor draw away from unfamiliar hands. She accepted procedures, yet never once answered to the name they gave her. Instead, she asked only one question, quietly, repeatedly, without variation. Which version of the year are we in? At first, staff chalked it up to confusion, to the strange phrasing of a child unsure of her surroundings. But she never said, "What year is it?" She never asked, "Is it still 1874? Always, she used the same exact phrasing. Which version? Dr. Coven, for all his fastidiousness, stopped recording some of her dialogue in official logs. Instead, he began a separate set of notes kept in a worn fieldbook, later found water-damaged among his estate papers. One entry reads, "Patient's grasp of time appears fractured, not by loss, but by surplus. Memory precedes context. Answers are rehearsed yet not performed. Pattern consistent, but motivation unclear." The other doctors didn't know what to make of her. One suspected a closed head injury. Another proposed seizure-induced hallucinations. But tests, however primitive by modern standards, revealed no irregularities. Her eyes tracked normally. Her reflexes were sharp. No stiffness, no tremor, no dilation of the pupils. Nothing to explain what was unfolding. What began as concern became quiet competition. One week she completed arithmetic meant for a child twice her age. The next, she could not identify a triangle. When coaxed, her penmanship resembled that of a parish clerk. Days later, she stared blankly at a pencil, unsure of how to hold it. One nurse, Joanna Fields, began keeping her own pocket journal, separate from official documentation, just fragments, observations, scribbled thoughts from long, tired nights. She noted a peculiar sensitivity in the girl, not to light, not to noise, but to repetition, not of routine, but of time itself. She does not like when the same hour repeats, Nurse Fields wrote. If a clock is wound backward or incorrectly, she freezes, as if waiting for it to catch up. This strange insight never reached Coven's desk. In March, a new note appeared in the margin of the girl's chart. Temporal identity disorder, unclassifiable. That diagnosis does not appear anywhere else in the infirmary's medical reference volumes. No nurse or physician later recalled writing it, and the ink, when analyzed, matched no other entry in her file. More curious still, the paper bearing that note had been glued in at a slight angle, as if inserted after the binding had already been set. Then came the memories, but not hers, not quite. During one afternoon evaluation, the child recited the names of two nurses. Neither had worked in the West Wing, not yet. 2 weeks later, both women were reassigned there. Room 12. This was never formally acknowledged, never written down, but word of it passed silently between staff, quietly, uneasily. Dr. Coven, in one of his final honest reflections, wrote, "She speaks as though the future is already past, but unchosen. She does not ask for belief, only to be correctly placed." After that, he stopped visiting the West Wing during his morning rounds. He cited fatigue. His handwriting changed, lines grew wider, margins uneven. What had once been crisp became unsure. Then one day, without comment, the wall clock from room 12 was gone. No maintenance request was filed. No record of removal. Only a pale rectangular outline remained. A clean shape against the dust. And then the envelope arrived. 3rd week of May. No return address. No signature. No seal. Delivered by hand. Left at the front desk of St. Augustine's Infirmary. No one saw who brought it. No one opened it. Yet everyone seemed to know it was meant for room 12. The courier who delivered the envelope was not in uniform. He wore no badge, no crest. But his satchel bore a federal seal not stitched but pressed into red wax. A mark meant to fade slowly over time and be noticed only once. The envelope, according to all surviving accounts, did not pass through the clerical desk. It did not appear in the registry. Instead, it was handed deliberately into the palms of Administrator Byron H. Latimer, a man renowned for his unyielding loyalty to bureaucratic process and a personal disdain for deviation. Inside the envelope, a red-stamped dossier labeled 427C Child. The code did not align with any known hospital indexing system. In fact, the C designation had only ever surfaced once before in an unrelated file from a military boarding institution. That record was later destroyed in a fire. No one at St. Augustine's had ever handled a C file. Latimer, who kept meticulous private ledgers for all federal correspondences, never recorded this one, not even in shorthand. And by nightfall, the original intake forms for the girl in room 12 had vanished. Not lost, not misfiled, removed. The nurse on morning rounds discovered that her drawer had been completely rearranged. In place of the intake documents sat a single placeholder sheet, printed, not handwritten. It read, C. Archive 4227C Child, 18th May. But no such archive 4227C appeared in any St. Augustine registry. Not under local state or military jurisdiction. From that moment on, the girl's name was no longer spoken. Not even in private. Nurses stopped referring to her by name. Physicians stopped referencing her in case updates. The paper chart clipped to her door was replaced with a brass plate. Blank. Unnumbered. Unlabeled. Staff were given verbal instruction only once. Do not speak her name. Do not write it. Refer to her only by her room. If written orders existed, they've long since disappeared. But somehow the silence around her became its own form of procedure. Like dust settling into a forgotten wing, the changes came quickly. Those who had cared for the girl were reassigned, quietly, without explanation. Nurse Joanna Fields, whose nightly logs had once been the most thorough, was suddenly rotated to surgical recovery. She never returned to the West Wing. Her private journal, the one she kept in her apron pocket, ends on the same day the envelope arrived. Abruptly, mid-sentence. No mention of the girl ever appears again. Dr. Corwin changed too. He resumed visits to room 12 but stopped carrying his leather notebook. Instead, he stood in silence. He watched her, then left. Only later, alone in his quarters, would he jot his impressions into a separate field journal, sparse, vague, and increasingly abstract. One note written in a cramped hand and partially erased beneath a darker annotation reads, "There is a difference between not remembering and not being allowed to recall." In June, a new lock was installed on the administrative archive room. No request form, no maintenance entry. But janitorial records confirm only one entry occurred between May 18th and July 2nd. That entry was made by Latimer himself. In the hospital's master log, he wrote, 42tu7c child. Progress noted. Retain silence. No definition of progress was ever provided. Elsewhere, the hospital's language began to shift. Doctors, once clinical and methodical, now spoke of the child as the instance. That term instance first appears in a misfiled patient appeal letter scribbled by a junior intern who had witnessed something but didn't know how to name it. The sentence read, "If we cannot classify her, we are not to speak of her." That is the new science. The phrase reappeared 1 month later, softened in an unsigned hospital-wide memo. Cases pending federal oversight shall remain confidential and unnamed within intra-staff communication. And so she became unspoken, even as she remained present. Sometime that summer, the walls outside room 12 were painted. No order was filed. No receipt recorded. The new color pale grey matched that of the isolation ward, despite the girl never being declared unstable or violent. It simply appeared one day, like a new skin over an old truth. There is no discharge note, no record of exit. The final notation in the ward log is dated June 29th at 11:04 a.m., signed by a nurse whose handwriting appears nowhere else in the hospital's files. After that, the logbook skips a page, not blank, missing. Then came winter. February 3rd, 1875. It arrived late that year in Albemarle County. The air held a strange stillness, the kind that pricks the back of the neck but offers no reason. That morning, the west-facing snowbanks outside St. Augustine's remained untouched. Not a single track disturbed the drifts until they appeared, wheel ruts shallow and wide, leading to the administrative portico. There had been no bell, no knock, no warning. Just a coach, black lacquered, silent, drawn by 2 matched bay horses, government branded, steaming in the cold as if they had stood there all night. 2 men emerged. They did not speak to reception. They did not sign the guest ledger. They simply entered the hospital, passed through restricted corridors, and were not stopped. If you're still listening, I wonder what would you have done? Had you been standing in that hallway? Would you have asked their names? Reached for the ledger? Or would you, like the others, simply stepped aside? If this story has stayed with you so far, press the like button so the record doesn't go missing. And if you've ever felt like time isn't always lining up around you, tell me in the comments, what's the one moment you feel you've already lived more than once? They wore no insignia, no badge, no stitched crest, only long wool coats, the lining trimmed in black leather, a style associated loosely with federal transport authorities yet standard to no known agency. The front desk attendant, long retired, would later leave a letter among her personal effects found posthumously. In it, she described them simply. They walked as though the building belonged to them. But they had no interest in seeing any of it. They did not ask to see the girl. They did not ask about her condition. They did not meet the attending physician. Instead, they moved with quiet authority to the superintendent's office. They remained there for precisely 23 minutes. Just before the door clicked shut behind them, the hospital's main clock tower kept meticulously in sync. Through monthly mechanical inspections, logged its final chime for the day. When the men re-emerged, one of them carried the brass-plated drawer labeled 40U27C child. He held it beneath his arm as if it weighed nothing at all. During that hour, nurse rotations were frozen. No meals were served. No rounds were logged. It remains the only undocumented hour in the daily ward ledger for room 12. No statement was issued. Only a printed note appeared on the staff board later that day. 4227C child records have been temporarily relocated for public health continuity. Refer all inquiries to administration. The phrase public health continuity had never before appeared in any hospital communication. It never appeared again. From that moment forward, the girl's presence shifted. Not gone, but no longer. Acknowledged. She was still observed, still seen, but not documented. Her name remained absent. Her chart replaced. Her meals arrived, but bore no annotations. Her bedding was laundered, yet no slips were signed. She was there but administratively invisible, as if language itself had been ruled inadmissible when applied to her. Dr. Corwin, visibly diminished by this point, abandoned all official entries. His private notes, once so precise, turned skeletal handwriting sharp-slanted, avoiding margins like a man fleeing the very page. One final line scribbled and uneven reads, "They did not need her consent. They did not need mine. They only required silence." It is the last mention of her in his surviving papers. Inside the hospital, questions began to rise, not spoken, but in absence. Medical students assigned to the West Wing were quietly pulled. The ward clerk, once famous for immaculate ledgers, began leaving gaps, then returned later with blotches of ink that erased entire columns. A janitor later claimed he saw one of the two men return alone weeks later and enter room 12. There is no official record of this visit. The janitor claimed he watched the man kneel beside the heating grate, extract a small object, and place it inside a wooden box. The box bore no markings, only a plain brass plate. In 1877, following the sudden death of Superintendent Latimer, the administrative wing was finally inspected. No documents remained. Nothing labeled 427C. Even the filing cabinet itself was gone, replaced with a newer model. Narrower drawers, modern hinges. Only a single hinge from the original cabinet was found. It had slipped between the floorboards, its pins corroded, its edges stripped, and stranger still, the official coach logs for February 3rd, the day the men arrived, show no entries. No visitors assigned to the hospital. No coaches scheduled for the region. The handwriting in the log appears consistent except for one page where a faint phrase had been pressed into the page, then erased. She didn't look surprised to see them. 17 years later, spring of 1892, the abandoned East Wing of St. Augustine's was undergoing repairs. Its floor warped from time, its hallway, used once for intern quarters, now forgotten. A carpenter lifting an old joist discovered a tin container wrapped in linen yellowed brittle. No lock, no name, only binding twine knotted in a sailor's loop, clean, deliberate. Inside a diary, the cover read, Lydia E. Marsh, nurse, 1874. Her name is nowhere in hospital payroll records. No census record for Albemarle County. No mention in the staff roster. And yet, the ink was aged. The paper matched hospital stationery stock from that period. Its entries began like any nurse's log. Bowel irregularities, complaints about drafts, linen shortages. But by early March, the tone changed. One entry stood out. 2 girls admitted the same week. Different names on file. Same eyes, same voice, same year. Both asked the same question. One sent to room 12, the other transferred. No chart exists for a second child. No intake card, no guardians, no family name. And yet, Nurse Marsh wrote clearly, not in confusion. Her hand remained steady, her descriptions unembellished. She saw both girls separately. One arrived in a cotton shift soiled by grease. The other wore what Marsh described as a linen collar, too stiff for a child. They were never seen together, or at least no one recorded seeing them together. And yet, within minutes of being alone, both asked, "Which version of the year is this?" In her later entries, the focus narrows. The rhythm of her hand becomes slower, more methodical, as if she knew these were the last pages anyone would ever read. You're still here, aren't you? Still following the thread, though the ink is starting to fade. If you are, leave a comment with just one word version. Let's see who else saw both girls. And subscribe not for me, but so we can keep pulling at the thread together. The child in room 12 eventually stopped speaking altogether. Even Nurse Marsh, who had recorded her every gesture with devoted precision, ceased calling her by name. The other child, the one without a room, was never officially noted, only glimpsed, a reflection behind glass, a soft footfall where no one had walked. Meals prepared for one girl were found already opened, though Marsh swore she hadn't yet entered the room. One creased, oil-stained page in the diary contains a small sketch. 2 side profiles, same hair, same frame, same child, and yet one marked AM, the other PM. The difference, the eyes. One looked left, the other right. As March deepened, Marsh's entries began to fray at the edges. She wrote of being watched in rooms she knew were empty. She referred to the hospital clock as misaligned, a device that measures only surface time, she said. On April 19th, her handwriting appeared. Slower, looped, then abruptly jagged. I tucked one in. But there were 2 impressions on the bed. The hospital supply log, cross-checked annually, confirms only 1 mattress ever requisitioned for room 12 that year. By mid-May, the diary spirals. Pages out of order, ink on the reverse side. One torn sheet reads, "They took the second girl away, but the one who remained hummed the first's lullaby." The final entry, dated May 28, 1874, reads only, "The child in room 12 looked up today. She said that version is closed." After that, the diary ends. There is no obituary for Nurse Lydia Marsh, no pension record, no hospital correspondence, no letter to next of kin. Her handwriting matches no other staff member on record from that decade. The linen wrapping the diary bore embroidered initials LM, stitched in thread, no longer produced in Virginia after 1872. And beneath the tin box, pressed into the dust of decades, was a second rectangular imprint. Same size, same dimensions, a missing twin box. By the summer of 1875, St. Augustine's West Wing had returned to its usual rhythm. The door to room 12 remained closed. The brass plaque still unmarked. No name, no label, no assigned nurse. Dr. Coven had formally transferred to a Norfolk convalescent facility. His file cited declining health. No further visits. Yet, deep in the hospital kitchen's dietary ledger, something persisted. Room 12 continued to receive meals, not just for days, for 6 more months after the girl's documented discharge. The kitchen ledger, a separate leather-bound volume, lists meals prepared and delivered daily. Bread, broth, tea, sometimes substituted with clove water or milk-soaked oats, but always the same layout. No utensils, no salt. Only one entry dated June 3rd bore special instruction. No noise upon entry. Avoid eye contact. Knock only once. The hospital's kitchen followed strict return inventory. Every tray was signed back into the scullery. Leftovers were weighed. Temperatures noted. Of the 127 trays sent to room 12 between May and October, 118 returned with food missing. 3 returned empty and cold. 6 came back still sealed, but warmer than when they left. No explanation was ever offered. The hospital furnace located in the basement had no ducts into that wing. No vents beneath room 12's floorboards, no known heat source, and no open flame had ever been approved in pediatric wards. One orderly, whose name appears only once in any staff ledger, added a note beside an October entry. Meal unclaimed. Plate warm to the touch. No scent. The discharge ledger, reviewed annually by the state board, officially lists the child's removal as May 2nd. Supervising physician line left unsigned. Guardian retrieval section crossed through in thick graphite. Beneath the smudge, one word, barely visible. Trans. Possibly transferred. Possibly transitory. Possibly nothing at all. In 1882, during a sweeping state audit of all public hospitals, her discharge was flagged. The notation case 4227C child not traceable to any known receiving facility. A red circle was drawn around the number, and beside it in smaller script, possibly clerical redundancy. Investigate. If you've stayed with this story to this point, you're already part of its record. These entries aren't for history, they're for memory. Leave a candle emoji in the comments if you believe the second girl existed. And if you've ever looked into your own reflection and felt that it wasn't quite aligned with you, you're not alone. Subscribe so we can keep searching for versions that haven't closed yet. No formal investigation was ever recorded, and yet hospital laundry continued to receive linens from room 12. No staff had been officially assigned to clean it since May. The custodial log made no further mention of the room, but every 9 days, fresh bedding appeared on the requisition forms, just as it had when the girl was officially present. No one asked why. In September, the food tray log recorded something strange. A porter identified only by the initials EEL noted. Return tray bore faint condensation. Napkin unfolded, then replaced. No imprint of warmth on the plate. Following this, entry meal delivery to room 12 ceased. No memo ordered the change. No chart reflected a conclusion. The space for room 12 in the dietary log remained blank for 5 weeks, as if someone still expected a resumption. It never came. Later, a line appeared at the bottom of the final entry. The handwriting didn't match any other. The ink was an unfamiliar shade, a greenish black, not used anywhere else in the infirmary. It read simply, "If she's not here, who's returning the dishes?" No name, no signature, and beneath it, the remaining pages of the dietary log had been torn out cleanly, right at the spine. No fray, no damage. Gone. By late 1875, a strange term began appearing in the margins of medical files across the region. Not officially, not in diagnoses, just quietly. A phrase, cognitive dissonance of unnatural origin. It was never defined, never published, never included in the lexicons of psychiatric classification. And yet, it appeared. In Virginia, in Maryland, in Pennsylvania. Always in the margins, never typed. Never central to a diagnosis, but always beside something it couldn't explain. Behavioral abnormalities, time disorientation, fractured perception, noted not as errors, but as whispers. The first known appearance of the phrase was found in the private journal of Dr. Arasu Skell, a neurosurgeon at Union Vale State Sanatorium. He had been tracking non-sequential ideation among adolescent patients. Many had no previous history of mental illness. Under a chart of one patient's sleep cycles, he wrote, "Unnatural dissonance between perceived and provable selfhood. CDU." It was the only time he used the abbreviation. Later, the page was torn from his log, but preserved through a carbon duplicate submitted to the board. From there, the term spread. 4 hospitals in 3 states reported its presence in files, each time written in red ink, not the rusted iron gall ink typical of clerical pens, but a bright modern pigment unlisted in any supply catalog. The handwriting varied, but all samples shared a peculiarity. An open O never closed, as if penned by someone trained in shorthand, but outside traditional clerical norms. No physician claimed to have written it. Some denied seeing it. Others assumed it had been added by a consulting agency or Federal Observer, though no such visitors had ever been logged. At the Baffled Children's Infirmary in Maryland, a page containing the phrase was removed from a girl's file after a nurse questioned its meaning. When reviewed weeks later by the board, that page had been replaced with a single blank sheet stamped, "Not applicable. Refer to source case." No further reference to the source case was ever found. Back at St. Augustine's, the term appeared again subtly in a requisition form for sedatives. There was no patient name, just the reference. Instance 12. The nickname staff had once used in hushed tones for the girl in room 12. By this point, Dr. Corwin had left the institution. His successor, Dr. Ali, wrote in a private letter, "Her diagnosis was never formalized. Instead, we inherit phrases like threads of a coat we are no longer allowed to wear. Detached. Professional." But a line deeper in his correspondence betrayed something else. "I request reassignment. Vertigo. Memory loss. A feeling that the clock repeats when I close my eyes." As CDU continued to surface, it stopped behaving like a diagnosis. It became a marker, applied to patients who did not fit time, who disobeyed sequence, who reacted without trigger, or mourned events that hadn't happened yet. One child refused to look into mirrors claiming, "My reflection doesn't agree with me anymore." Another listed names of unborn siblings. All correct. All verifiable, but not yet real. In each case, not delusion, not hallucination, but inversion. Responses before stimulus, emotions before events. A physician at the Mayfield Neurological Asylum wrote the most chilling summary. These patients believe they are in the wrong version of themselves. They speak of the present as if it's already been replaced. And still, no board, no agency, no institution claimed the term. CDU was never adopted officially, never standardized, used but never owned. By 1877, it faded from the ledgers, just as suddenly as it had appeared, except for one last copy, stamped, not written into the final blank page of a surgical index book at St. Augustine's. In red ink, no date, no author, no case number. Just one line. Initial usage verified. Return unnecessary. If you're still listening, leave the initials CDU in the comments. Some versions of this timeline won't let you remember this tomorrow, but others might. And if you've ever felt like time is listening more than you are watching it, well, you're not alone. Subscribe so we don't forget this version of the story. The book's cover bore the year 1875, but its embossing was misaligned. Exactly 6 years off, and in a personnel folder long forgotten in a misfiled drawer beneath the boiler room, registry lies the final known document related to room 12. It wasn't a case note, not a chart, not even a medical record. It was a one-page memorandum, stamped, internal use only, signed, without a name. The seal in the corner wasn't from St. Augustine's. It wasn't from any known hospital or federal board. Issued April 1875, under an unfamiliar directive, Standard Obscura Protocol. The memo reads, effective immediately. For any staff assigned to or having prior contact with Subject 427CE child, remove all recollection of the 5 minutes prior to engagement. Do not attempt recall. Do not cross-reference notes. No memory is preferable to flawed memory. That phrase, flawed memory, had only ever appeared 5 times in St. Augustine's records. 4 of those were here. The 5th, scrawled in the margin of Dr. Corwin's final note before retirement. I remember remembering, but not what. After the memo's circulation staff behavior shifted almost overnight. Nurses who had once documented the girl's posture, pacing. Even the angle of her gaze began answering with detachment. When Nurse Ellery, who had kept 41 entries referencing room 12, was asked about the child, during a routine review, she replied, "I'm sorry. I don't believe I was ever assigned to room 12. Orderlies began skipping the room on rounds. Some left blanks. Others wrote simply NA, a notation, reserved for rooms under fumigation or repair. And yet, supply orders for linens, food and medicine to room 12 remained consistent through the summer of 1875. Then the handwriting began to change. Entries related to the girl became jagged, misaligned, slanted, with mirrored letters and uneven spacing. A handwriting analyst later remarked, "It resembles avoidance, not error." And then swaths of record keeping simply vanished. On June 12, 1875, a surgical procedure was logged, removal of a foreign object, a glass sliver from a pediatric patient. But no name was given. The physician signed with just an initial. The tray matched those reserved for the West Wing, but no recovery note, no anesthetist. The next page in the surgical book had been glued shut. When surviving staff were questioned years later, their answers were murky. Some denied the room was ever occupied. A former ward clerk swore under oath, "Room 12 was vacant during my entire tenure," but his name appears on 3 internal memos regarding oversight of room 12. This wasn't accidental forgetting. It was deliberate deletion, an institutional refusal not to misremember, but to install absence. At the bottom of the Obscura memo, nearly erased by water damage and time, a final line appears under raking light. If memory persists longer than instruction, permits report for review under Tier 2 recalibration. No such tier is mentioned in any hospital governance manual. No staff ever admitted to treatment for overattention. What remains are signatures missing from their own documents, keys logged but never returned, and a room that was always full even when no one could say who lay inside. By the winter of 1876, patterns began to appear elsewhere. Children in Wilmington, Annapolis, Harrisburg, previously healthy, suddenly exhibiting the same shared affliction, temporal inversion. Not forgetfulness, not delirium, but event disorder. A child in Pennsylvania calmly told a doctor, "You already said that?" Even though he hadn't spoken yet. A girl in Maryland completed math problems before they were read aloud. In every case, no physical cause could be found. And in the margins of 4 case files, a phrase re-emerged, written in red ink, unsigned, identical to what had once haunted St. Augustine's. Cognitive dissonance of unnatural origin, used, repeated, feared, but never defined, and never owned. This is the part where the story would usually end. But maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe you're still here, still wondering why a hospital would build 2-room 12s on a map, still thinking about a brass plate with no name, still listening. If you are, tell me in the comments, what time is it? Where you are? What version of the year are you in? Let's find out who else is here with us. And if this version ever slips away, you'll know where to come back to. Like the video so the path doesn't vanish. Subscribe so the version remembers you. In March of 1876, a cluster of civilian medical researchers drawn together by a growing unease began comparing notes. They called themselves the East Coast Pediatric Collegium. Their correspondence was quiet, careful, and coded, shared only among peers they trusted, those who had begun to notice the same anomaly. Children across multiple counties, displaying not memory loss, but a reversal of sequence. Symptoms echoed one another, reflected like patterns in a cracked mirror. And though no origin case could be confirmed, a name began to surface in the margins. Room 12, St. Augustine's Infirmary. No file could be located, no chart retrieved, but a dietary requisition slip from 3 years prior, signed in Dr. Corwin's unmistakable hand, contained a number that returned again and again. 427C child. 14 physicians, all with commendations, many of whom had served in Union Army hospitals, signed a petition. It was addressed to the Office of Federal Medical Oversight in Baltimore. Their request was modest. They asked only to review the file for non-governmental academic purposes. They included case comparisons, charts, diagnostic anomalies, patterns of displacement. The letter was sent by post on March 8, 1876. No receipt was ever confirmed. When no response came, by April 2, physicians traveled to the Baltimore office in person. They were told no such petition had arrived. Mail logs from that week revealed 4 missing entries. Their numbers were skipped cleanly. The sequence simply jumped. The secretary on duty resigned the next morning. Her resignation note gave only 5 words: cognitive fatigue inconsistent with task volume. 3 weeks later, one of the original signatories, Dr. Wickham of New Haven, received a sealed envelope, no stamp, no return address. Inside a single folded page, no salutation, no signature, only one typed line: "Your curiosity has been noted. It is not contagious unless permitted." Wickham never spoke of the letter again. The petition was never mentioned in the Collegium's proceedings. Its case files quietly withdrawn. One signatory, Dr. Beale, who had once lectured forcefully against institutional silence, was reassigned to a desk job at a sanatorium for aging veterans. His final lecture notes, scribbled on a page torn from a prescription pad, read, "Time is not a symptom. It is a wound. No file marked 427C child was ever archived at the Baltimore office. Its existence was deemed non-verifiable, and when Dr. Wickham passed in 1892, the carbon copy of the original petition was found burned in his hearth. Only one portion remained intact, the signature line. 14 names, perfectly spaced and faintly visible, one line above. Patient record sealed under classification, lattice exposure, civilian tie. No such classification appears in any declassified federal index. But then, in the spring of 1904, 30 years after the first known entry of file 427C child, a single artifact surfaced at a private estate auction in Charlottesville, Virginia. The item, a gelatin, silver print 4 by 6 inches stored between hymnals inside a box of ephemera salvaged from the demolished East Annex of St. Augustine's. The image was simple. A cot, a wool blanket tucked with military precision, a washstand, a wooden chair. The paint on the walls flaked not from water or fire, but from stillness. Light filtered in from the south-facing window, dulled by soot. It might have been any recovery room from the period, except for the mirror, hung on the far wall, bordered by cherry wood. In its reflection, the bed. 2 distinct impressions, one deep heavy, the clear weight of a sleeping body, the other faint, lighter, as if made by someone smaller, someone who only sat down briefly and then vanished. But the foreground of the photograph showed only one indentation, just one. This is where our file ends, or if you've been listening carefully, where it loops. If you're still with me, ask yourself, what version of the year are we in? What impression does time leave in your room? And if it ever feels like someone sat down beside you, but you didn't see them come in, just remember, some stories don't stay filed. They stay folded, waiting for the right mirror to open. If you found yourself here by accident, don't worry. Most people do. If the story settled with you, you can help preserve this version. Like the video. Leave a comment. Tell me what time it is where you are. And subscribe, so you'll find your way back in case the next version forgets. The image at first was thought to be flawed. Analysts suspected photographic doubling light, warping, or silver emulsion instability. But a formal forensic review in 1911 by the Bureau of Archival Preservation in Philadelphia found no evidence of tampering. The original negative discovered shortly after the print itself showed no damage. The final report stated, "Mirror image presents structural integrity, consistent with original reflection. No retouching, no composite. Mirror position firm. Verified. Discrepancy unexplained." The photograph reignited interest in a space that by 1904 no longer officially existed. Room 12 had been bricked over part of the hospital's slow conversion into a home for invalid veterans. No architectural plans survive. The only existing floor plan of the West Wing lists Room 11 directly adjacent to Room 13. No intervening space. When questioned, staff from the era responded with confusion. One nurse in an unsigned affidavit recalled, "That room always had a mirror. But I don't remember anyone cleaning it. I don't remember anyone looking into it either." By the time investigators returned to St. Augustine's in 1906, the mirror had vanished. Its absence was noted briefly in the ward's maintenance log. Removed per storage directive, tag 11B. No tag by that designation was ever found in the hospital's records. The Department of the Interior's Surplus Furnishings Office held no match. Nothing was listed as missing. Nothing officially had ever been there. Dr. Matthias Elwood, an early photographic archivist and amateur historian, kept the image pinned above his desk until his death in 1933. In the margins of his journal, he wrote, "Impression without presence, reflection without source, a contradiction only visible when not sought." His family burned most of his papers after his passing, citing obsessive scrawl and incoherent margins. But the photo was spared, sold with a collection of oddities to a collector in Maine. That collector, William D. Grounds, claimed the glass of the frame cracked clean through on the first night he brought it home. No impact, no pressure, just a single vertical fracture. He never replaced the pane. To this day, the image remains in private hands. The original negative is missing from the Pennsylvania Bureau's archive. In its sleeve is a single typed note, "Duplicate verified, original no longer applicable." The paper, identical in texture and watermark to the stationery used at St. Augustine's, except for one detail. Its watermark reads 1912. In the internal archive of the U.S. Army Medical Division, buried between battlefield trauma reports and autopsies from Panama Canal expeditions, lies an unindexed page. The tag on its folder is rarely used. Event unverified. The document bears no date, no case number. The ink has browned at the edges, yet the paper feels oiled, untouched by time. At the top, 3 lines of text have been blacked out, redacted completely. What remains typed in an unregistered serif font reads simply, "I am one of 3. The others are pending." There is no signature. The final period was added in pen, handwritten. That single dot has been analyzed dozens of times. Its placement slightly below the baseline, too precise to be accidental. The phrase first entered scholarly circles in 1954 during an internal audit of anomalous military case files. Of the 14 documents reviewed under Event Unverified, this was the only one not linked to any known patient or institution. Yet, when archivists magnified the upper right margin, a faint numerical stamp appeared, just barely visible in red ink. 427C. Some records are misfiled, some are erased. Some are only ever glimpsed in reflection, and some were never meant to be written down at all. Thank you for joining me in this version. If you'd like to find your way back, subscribe or leave a note below. Not a name, just an impression. And if you see a mirror that shouldn't be there, look away. The designation was clear 427C, the same file number used at St. Augustine's Infirmary 3 decades prior. Yet, nowhere else in the Army Archive does this code appear. There is no accompanying record, no patient chart, no explanation, only a sentence typed with mechanical precision and sealed in administrative limbo. I am one of 3. The others are pending. The language was plain, declarative, but the implications were enough to trigger internal review. There had been no mention of duplication in the official records from St. Augustine's, no reference in physician notes, no documented sightings of multiples, and yet fragments surfaced. In Nurse Lydia Marsh's hidden diary, discovered behind warped floorboards in 1892, she described 2 identical girls, same voice, same eyes, asking the same question. One was reassigned, the other remained, and still, the bed bore 2 impressions only in the mirror. A hospital requisition from 1876 preserved today in a municipal warehouse in Richmond contains a peculiar handwritten note in the margins. Do not admit more than one at a time. Delay the others. Dispersal disrupts containment. The author was unsigned. The script unmatchable. Its tone was instructional, not observational. Dr. Corwin, the primary physician at St. Augustine's, displayed increasing signs of fixation in his final months, obsessed with numerics, mirrored structures, and containment protocols. In one of his surviving notebooks, a torn scrap remains. At its center, he wrote, 1 is manageable, 2 is a misalignment, 3 opens a door. He was never interviewed after his early retirement. His personal effects were seized by a federal office that no longer exists. The original document bearing the phrase, "I am one of 3, remained under review until 1971, when a microfiche operator filed a formal memo. This file has no beginning. It has no end. I can only transcribe the sentence it leaves behind." Oddly, that same sentence later appeared in 2 separate archives but altered. "I am 2 of 3. The other is pending. No explanation, no corrections. The originals had vanished." In 1921, during the routine transfer of outdated medical holdings from a shuttered Army depot in Central Virginia to a federal cryptographic research center in Prince George's County, Maryland, a single shipment did not match the inventory. The typed manifest, carbon pressed and categorized under anatomical holdings, non-combatant included tissue slides, bone fragments, formalin jars, autopsy remnants. But beneath the listing for optic nerves, a line appeared. Subject 4227C, juvenile female. Preserved brain section. Marked temporal disarray. No death certificate. No autopsy report. No surgical record. And critically, no full body ever accounted for. The implication not only had she died, but that she had been anatomized and segmented for purposes not fully medical. Yet nowhere in the federal mortality tables, the hospital ledgers, or even the Army's own forensic reviews is her death recorded. She disappears into the absence. The term temporal disarray is unusual in anatomical contexts. Its origin points instead to cryptographic language, a term for pattern instability across iterations. Indeed, the brain sample was not sent to a medical lab. It was assigned to a subdivision of the Signal Intelligence Service, which in the 1920s had begun experimental work on nonlinear data sets, biological errata, cognitive asymmetry. Internal memos declassified decades later describe a juvenile specimen used during cognitive mapping. In one letter from a technician to a colleague at MIT, a symmetrical hemisphere, collapsed long-term clustering, no electrical stimulation required. Pattern was pre-existing. The pattern was never defined. No name was assigned. Only the tag remained. Subject 4227C. Its provenance was listed simply Unspecified Army Archive. Cold Storage Vault 4. There is no record of the vault being emptied. There is no record of it being locked. Just the entry and the number 427C. What is traceable is not always recoverable. What is catalogued is not always meant to be understood. Some designations are left blank for a reason. Some mirrors should remain covered. That vault no longer exists. Vault 4 beneath the old cold storage wing was demolished in 1936 during a public works expansion for municipal water treatment. Its archival floor plans, since recovered, contain no listing for biological storage. Only cipher disks, encrypted reels, and sealed courier satchels. Yet, those who handled the final shipment recalled something strange, an unusually weighted canister lined in lead and brass. The contents weighed no more than 100 grams. The lid bore no lock but was affixed with a brass medallion engraved with a sigil unseen in any federal archive. 3 concentric circles, the inner 2 broken at uneven offset intervals. No agency has claimed it. No scientific body has recognized the symbol. No further record of the sample exists after 1922. In 1943, during a document purge, a partially charred manifest was discovered in the facility's furnace room. Among the few legible lines, preserved juvenile cortex pending, and written beside it, in a different hand, retrieved. At the bottom, identity loop not closed. Contain until re-entry stabilizes. There is no known medical or cryptographic definition for identity loop, and there is no autopsy on file. The next shipment in the log 428M adult male cardiac deviation was fully redacted in 1958. Its existence erased, but one graphite note survived at the bottom. Do not reclassify. The girl was never declared dead. In the sub-basement of the Pentagon's archival wing, beneath outdated telecom charts and misfiled troop transport manifests, a researcher stumbled upon a page that should not have existed. It bore the emblem of the United States War Department, but was filed not to a soldier nor to battlefield reports, but to a psychiatric memorandum dated 1876. The document had no patient name, only a 5-digit code, 407C. The subject line read, "Instability of linear identity among pre-language minors." No medical institution, military or civilian, has ever used this classification. The memo's contents were brief, impersonal, and chillingly composed. It describes a juvenile subject, non-combatant, whose perception of time was non-causal, non-replicable, internally consistent across contradictory memory states. She exhibited pre-retentive recall. Identity persists despite external rearrangement. Behavior aligns with temporal paradox modeling. No physician was named, no methodology explained, no location cited, and no witnesses listed. At the bottom, a red-stamped header reads National Defense Tier 3, and below it in bold, do not reintroduce. Containment is preferable to replication. Instability precedes awareness. This memo marks the first known instance of a civilian psychiatric anomaly filed directly under federal military classification. It predates the Pentagon itself by over 60 years, suggesting that the architecture of defense record-keeping already reserved space for that which was unverifiable but not unimportant. Later scrutiny of the phrase "do not reintroduce" suggests it was not a warning about social integration, but about biological recurrence, of fear, not of a memory returned, but of a pattern. A 1914 draft from Army Intelligence, since partially declassified cross-references, a now lost file. C3 variant origin Albemarle. In its own cryptic language, it refers to inheritance drift across pre-linear cognition models. What unsettled the archivist most, however, was not what was written in the memo, but how it was written. Calm, bureaucratic, detached, as if the anomaly was neither new nor rare, but simply a boundary long known. On the reverse of the memo, faint in pencil, an anonymous hand wrote decades later. Third confirmation of non-looping identity drift. Recurred in female minors only. Phenotype unreproducible post-1900. There is no citation. there is no mention of 427C by name, and the phrase non-looping identity drift has never appeared in another known document, military, psychiatric, or academic. In 1972, Dr. Edwin Laros, a neurologist once consulted during early encryption model tests, was shown the memo. His comment: "This reads less like a diagnosis and more like a boundary marker, where understanding was instructed to stop." The file was quietly resealed under a new index: Discontinued Behavioral Research, Civilian Exceptions. The reference code was scrubbed, but the microfilm copy remains untouched. The subject line still visible: Instability of linear identity among pre-language minors. And in the corner, faint but traceable, 427C. The most curious feature of the page, however, is its watermark. Though the memo is dated 1876, the watermark, visible only under sodium light, displays a year not yet reached at the time of its filing. Paper manufactured 1899. No investigation followed. No amendment was issued, and no paper mill by that name existed in 1876. In the early summer of 1922, a woman appeared barefoot at the edge of Pembroke Hollow, a hamlet of fewer than 40 souls nestled in the foothills of Albemarle County. She wore a muslin shift discolored by time and sun. Her fingernails were dirt-lined but unbroken. She carried no bag, no identification, only a scrap of stiff silvered paper clenched tightly in one hand. A grocer's apprentice who first saw her later signed a notarized affidavit. She spoke like someone who'd just left supper, not like someone lost. When asked who she was, she answered, "I was just at the hospital." There had been no hospital in Pembroke Hollow for over 20 years. The nearest St. Augustine's Infirmary had closed in 1895. Its west wing collapsed. Its records scattered during federal sanitarium redistribution. But the woman named its staff, Dr. Corwin, Nurse Lydia Marsh, Superintendent Latimer, all dead for over 3 decades. She named their positions accurately. She identified the interior layout of the long-buried infirmary. And when she said it plainly. Room 12. No birth certificate matched her. She appeared in her early 40s. Her language was precise, but strange old terms surfaced in casual speech, fumigant word slips, blank side. Words last used before 1900. The object she carried, that silvered scrap, appeared to be the backing of a mirror, its edge torn in an uneven curve. No ink, no watermark. But when dusted, a raised impression became visible, pressed faintly into the surface. This version is not the original. Do not follow. The phrase appears nowhere else in any surviving record. The page was catalogued as Specimen Unclassified, Local Recovered by the Albemarle Historical Society, then lost in 1937 during a storage consolidation. The woman herself? She was detained for 48 hours at the county house. No signs of delusion, no trauma, no aggression. She refused food, drank water, never slept. When asked about her memory, she replied, "Only I left. But I did not exit." The clerk assigned to record her responses noted that she sometimes paused mid-sentence as if waiting for another voice to catch up. She was transferred to a state facility in Staten, where her file was marked unplaceable, custody non-retainable. She vanished the next morning. Final entry in her intake log: bed unused, water cup full. Note left blank, signed by orderly Elridge, but no trace of her clothing or mirror scrap was ever found. In the transfer ledger, where staff were required to initial, one final entry appears, written in a different hand, neat, practiced, unfaded by time. There is no staff member known by that number. And that page, unlike every other bears, no crease down the spine as though it had never been turned. In 1947, following a post-war reorganization of military medical intelligence, a restricted internal review was commissioned. It was labeled Initial Assessments of Legacy Containment Incidents, Biological and Cognitive Outliers. Among the entries most relating to disease control failures or untraceable deformities was a single reference, the 1874 anomaly. No name, no hospital, just a sentence. Subject presented with more than one temporal signature. Identity fixation unresolvable across linear sequencing. And then, suppression required to prevent propagation via maternal inheritance. The phrase "more than one temporal signature" was never defined. But in the glossary, a term appears in no other federal file: dyschronological symptom expression. The manifestation of cognitive orientation untethered from chronological placement. She wasn't simply lost in time. She may never have been within it to begin with. Further marginalia handwritten adds this: had we not acted, the pattern may have spread through maternal inheritance. The word maternal was underlined in different ink. No genetic theory, not then not, now considers orientation to time a heritable trait. And yet, the sentence remained unaltered through 3 departmental transitions. The girl was never named, not an oversight. It was intentional. Her designation? National Security Tier 3. Non-combatant. The same tier used decades earlier in the Pentagon memo titled Instability of Linear Identity Among Pre-Language Minors. At the end of the 1947 report, a single handwritten page was inserted. It bore no formatting. It was dated only October. It read, "There are children still alive today. Check the years they ask about." No appendix followed. The file was sealed. A month later, a quiet directive circulated. All cases involving non-sequential cognition in minors were to be routed directly to DC. No physician was to be notified. The policy remained in place until 1956. When archivists reopened the folder in the 1980s, they discovered a discrepancy. The index card listed 50 pages. The folder contained 14. There was no note of redaction. The missing pages were simply gone. The final entry on the index card, never recovered, bore a strange title. Cross-variant entry points. Child A, Child B, placeholder. The placeholder's name had been penciled in, then erased. But the indentation remained shallow and deliberate. Child C. The file was sealed. The room was bricked over, and the names those whispered in the margins were erased from every ledger that dared record them. But remnants surface in blueprints, in basement doors that shouldn't open, in pages no one remembers writing. If you've ever seen patterns like this, mirrored rooms, misplaced records or paths that vanish mid-step, leave them in the comments below. Others are watching quietly, and some of them remember. Like this video if the map still opens for you. Subscribe if you're willing to keep turning the pages, even the ones never meant to be found. And whatever you do, don't look for room 13. It was never drawn, but it answers.